The only shooting stick with one-handed trigger pull adjustments has a new way to keep you at the top of your game. The Trigger Stick Apex. Built for sturdy support that adapts to unforgiving terrain with easy adjustments to make your big shots. With our DuraSteady 3-piece carbon leg design and interchangeable rock-solid clamp, nothing tops the Apex. The Trigger Stick Apex, only from Primrose.
At Midway USA, we know the AR-15 is one of the most popular rifles in modern American history. Known for its modularity and widespread use, it's often considered essential to any gun collection. The essential things you need to run an AR-15 are usually always in stock during shortages, things like magazines and 5.56 ammo. Whether you're looking to buy a new AR-15 or buy parts for your modern sporting rifle, log on and for just about everything for the outdoors, shop MidwayUSA.com.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This is the 150th episode of the podcast. This is an exciting milestone because it's a nice round number of 150. And today, as I've done with my 100th podcast and my 50th episode, is I'm changing up the format of the podcast. Usually, I have the same format every week. It's about 20 minutes of me talking about fly fishing and the outdoors, and then I go into a review of what was on Casting Across that week, and then I have a product recommendation. Those two parts of the podcast that I talked about are still going to happen at the end, but instead of me talking about fly fishing for 20 minutes, we're switching it up, and we are bringing back a popular segment, something that I've gotten a lot of great feedback on. In fact, at not this last fly fishing show because it didn't exist because of COVID, but the previous fly fishing show when I was at Edison, New Jersey. I almost had Somerset for years and years of being in Somerset. When I was in Edison, New Jersey, I had more feedback about anything in Casting Across I got because of one of these podcasts. So I'm not going to introduce it. I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves and then talk about what this podcast is going to be today. So first, who are you?
I'm Timothy. I'm his son.
And how old are you, Timothy?
9 years old.
Very good. What grade does that make you?
I am in 4th grade.
Fantastic. And how about you?
My name is Daniel. I am 7 and I am in 2nd grade.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. I have two other boys. They're not part of the podcast today. There's a 5-year-old, a newly minted 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So what's the podcast going to look like today, Timothy?
So me and Daniel are going to ask Dad some questions, and then we are going to talk about it together.
Fantastic. Does that sound like a plan, Daniel?
Yeah.
All right. So because you're the youngest, why don't you go first? What's the first question that you have for us to talk about in the podcast?
Would you the fly fish or lure fish?
Would I rather fly fish or lure fish? So sometimes lure fishing is also called conventional fishing. People use spinning rods and bait casting rods. I would rather fly fish. I like using lures. I especially like using lures when I'm in a boat because I'm not that great of a boatsman. So, and by boat, I mean like a small craft like kayaks or canoes. But I am not opposed to fly fishing that way, and I fly fish more than I use lures. But I have a lot of fun using lures when I'm in a canoe or a kayak because I'm not really good at steering and paddling. It's just not something I spend an awful lot of time doing. So I would say that's really the primary time that I like to use a spinning rod. But I guess also too, when not just 3 of us, but when all of the boys are out fishing, I like using lures because I'm usually right on top of one of you trying to untangle something, and so I can't get the space necessarily that I need to use a fly rod. How about you, Daniel? What's your preference?
I like fly fishing.
How about you, Timothy?
I like lure fishing.
What's your favorite lure to use?
I like to use a bait fish lure.
Bait like a crankbait?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Do you have a preferred color?
I like golden.
Golden's good. We have lots of golden shiners up here in New England, so that's a good pattern. All right, next question. What's the next question, Timothy?
when was the first time you ever went fishing ever? Not just fly fishing, like lure fishing.
Okay, the very first time that I can remember, and I'm not sure if there's any way to actually get this answer, is with my grandpa Leonard. This would be your great grandpa. And actually Timothy got to meet him. Daniel didn't. He passed away before Daniel was born. But I remember him taking me fishing on a canal in central Illinois. So that's where I was born, in the middle of Illinois. Not trout fishing by any stretch of the imagination, just lots of ponds and some pretty big, slow rivers. There's some of those rivers that are overrun with those silver carp. We've watched those videos of when people are flying down the river in their boats, and those carp are jumping up and hitting people in the face, and people are bow hunting for carp from the back of their boats. Those are the rivers that kind of are around where I grew up. But I don't think the silver carp were there when I was little. But all I had to say, there's a canal system, a scenic canal. It's not a scenic canal, but it's like a historic canal that runs through kind of where we were in Illinois that connected a couple of those river systems. And there was old locks that were no longer in operation. So the locks were ways to have, relatively still water and have boats move through them. And because they were relatively still, the bluegill, absolutely loved them, and the catfish too. And so I can remember distinctly going fishing with worms and bobbers with my grandpa Leonard out the back of his truck. He would smoke his pipe, and he would sit on a little wicker folding chair. And I remember also hooking him it was either the ear or the nose. I bet my dad, your grandpa, would remember exactly what happened. But that was the first time I remember fishing, period, and catching like bluegill and sunfish and stuff like that.
A question to go on with the question. Did you catch a fish when you went on one of those fishing trips?
Yeah, bluegill and sunfish and bass and stuff like that. And I remember eating them. I remember also having a scaler in his tackle box and just being fascinated about how that thing worked like a torture device. But yeah, that was the first time.
What would you do if there was a bear?
If there was a bear?
Yeah.
Now, real quick, this is a very personal question because, Daniel, what is your nickname?
Bear.
That's right, because when you were a baby, you were very growly. Sometimes you are still kind of growly, but yeah. So what would I do if there's a bear? Actually, tell you what, I'm going to turn this one back around on you guys. Timothy, you're 9. What would you do if there was a bear?
I would don't look it in the eye and back up slowly. Don't make any sudden move. Just leave it alone.
All right, that's Timothy's answer. How about you, Daniel?
I would whack it with my fishing rod.
Well, I don't think that one of those would go very well. So, all right, so now I think this is important because not that people are turning to the Casting Across Fly Fishing podcast for wilderness survival tips and skills, but I think it's important for us to mention that we live on the East Coast, and so the species of bear that we would encounter would be what, Daniel?
Black bear.
That's right, but if someone were to be living out in, say, Montana, Timothy, they'd be seeing...
grizzly bear. Yikes.
Yes, yikes indeed. And they're much scarier and much more aggressive. I mean, you don't have to be afraid of them. You don't have to be afraid of really any animal in the woods. But, okay, so actually, Timothy, yours was a pretty good answer. I would say that if I encountered a bear, which, you know what? I was actually just talking about this with a friend. We were up fishing in the White Mountains a couple of weeks ago, and he says that he frequently sees bears when he's fishing. And I have only seen bears when I've been fishing one time, and I was still in the parking lot. Like, I could still, hear cars going by when I saw it. So I don't see bears that frequently. That being said, if I were to encounter a bear in the mountains, in the Shenandoahs, or up in the Whites, or in the Catskills, or something like that, then I would do what you said, which was stop and back up and kind of make a circuitous route around that bear. If it was on the trail or if it was off the side of the trail, I'll do the same thing and really just keep my distance. And also just to see if there was cubs, make sure that I wasn't getting in between it and the cub. But really just take it easy. And even though there's a very good chance that bear, if long before I saw that bear, that it saw me and it got out of there because they have a really good eyesight, really good sense of smell, and they're really attuned to nature, whereas usually we're just kind of stomping through the woods, especially if we got our fishing gear on and our nippers and our forceps and our fly boxes are all jingling and jangling as we walk through the woods, chances are that bear is going to know that we're there and it's going to get out of there because it doesn't want to be bothered by something that's big and jangly. But if I were to encounter the bear, I would just take a wide, circuitous route, keeping it in my field of vision. And if it wasn't moving and if it was on the trail or it was looking agitated, or if I could tell that maybe it was a mama bear, then I'd probably just, make other plans and back up. But also try to look kind of unintimidating to it. Not like prey, but also not like something that is threatening it. That's a very good question, Daniel. All right, Timothy, what's the next one?
Would you rather catch a medium-sized fish with a fly rod or a large fish with your favorite lure?
That's actually another really good question. I caught a really big bass earlier this summer on a Rapala floating minnow, which is by far my favorite lure to fish. Just a black and gray Rapala floating minnow. And it was a lot of fun to catch that big bass. And honestly, I think you put me in a kind of a weird spot. I like having days where I catch lots of fish in a particular way. So, for example, I'm happy catching like 14-inch wild trout rising to dry flies. A 14-inch wild trout in a lot of places is just a pretty average-sized fish, and there's nothing too spectacular about it, but there's something about knowing that it's a wild fish and knowing that it's rising and that I'm able to catch it in that way that I really, really enjoy. That being said, I don't know if I would necessarily trade that experience of catching a number of fish like that for one big fish on a rod and reel with a lure. I don't know. That's a really good question. If you had to pin me down, and maybe I put too many qualifications on that fly rod fish that I was talking about, I guess it would be a really big fish on a spinning rod. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So does that satisfy your question?
Sure.
All right, Daniel. These are good questions. What's your next question, buddy?
Would you rather have leaky waders or forget your sunglasses on a sunny day?
Oh man, would I rather have leaky waders or forget my sunglasses on a sunny day? Okay, so here's another qualification. What's the weather like? Because if it's cold, I would absolutely not want leaky waders. And then I guess also like how big is the leak? Because I've had older pair of waders that have like pinholes, and you get like a wet spot the size of like a quarter or like a dollar bill that is uncomfortable, but it's not awful. But I would say that as much as I think that having a good quality pair of polarized sunglasses is an essential part of going fishing, especially if you're wading, which I would imagine that would be the situation if you're in waders. I would say I don't want to be wet when I want to be dry. I don't mind being wet, and you guys know that. A lot of times when we go fishing, we go wet wading. I don't have waders for a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So we're usually fishing in a situation where we can just walk in our water shoes or even barefoot. So I don't mind being wet. But if I'm wearing waders, there's a reason for that. So if that means that my day has had a bad turn of events. So I would say that even though I really want to have a good pair of sunglasses, both to help me see fish and to wade safely, I think that I would just be in such a foul mood if I had leaky waders that it would probably ruin my day even quicker. So that's my answer to that one. That's a good, scary question, Daniel.
What snacks do you like to take on your fishing trips?
All right, I'm going to turn this one back on you guys. What snacks do you like to take on fishing trips? You first.
Mostly Jolly Ranchers.
Yeah, what is it with you guys and Jolly Ranchers? What do you think, Daniel?
Gummy bears and Twizzlers.
Oh, man. Which is fantastic. Both of those snacks that you guys mentioned are like not on the to eat list, since you both have orthodontic work that is currently happening. So, all right, I like Twizzlers. I like Jolly Ranchers. I especially like gummy bears. I'm particularly fond of Haribo gummy bears. That's my Black Forest are okay. Those Albanese ones, I'm not sure what the hype is about those. Haribo gummy bears are spectacular, and I will eat them if they're put in front of me. But I don't bring them fishing. So usually when I go fishing, there's a couple of snacks I like. So I really like hot tamales, which is kind of in that same family of snacks. So that's one of my favorites. I also like licorice. Now, I like soft licorice. The problem with that is when you put it in your pack, you put it in your pocket, and it gets nasty. So I usually have to go with Good and Plenty when I do that. But I do like granola bars. I do like trail mix. I like the fruit and nut granola bars from, I can't think of what brand that is. We buy them at Costco, so we get like 100 of them at a time. I like trail mix. When I make trail mix, it's usually peanuts and cashews and craisins and raisins, and then whatever dried fruit we have in hand. Like right now, I think we have pineapple and dried cherries. So I'm a big fan of that because there's a lot of fat and there's a lot of carbs and there's a lot of stuff in it, but it's also not like fake. So that's usually the snacks that I bring with me when I'm fishing. And of course, if I can stop at a gas station, then I'll get something particularly unhealthy. But that's a very good question.
Would you rather hook yourself or catch no fish?
Oh man, Daniel, that's diabolical. All right, hook myself or catch no fish. Now, real quick, these children were assigned this task of creating these questions. We homeschool, which we're really pumped about. We're excited about. They're doing great. They have plenty of socialization options out there. They finish their school day with multiple different classes by lunchtime. So, I mean, we're in a great place with this. But this is one of the things is I get to say, hey, here's one of your little projects, and I find a place for it to fit into their curriculum. Their mother finds a place for it to fit into their curriculum. So they've been thinking about these questions for a week. So a question like, would you rather hook yourself or catch no fish is an excellent question, Daniel. Again, I'm sure I could throw some caveats in there like, well, what kind of fish would I be catching? Where would I hook myself? I think I would rather be skunked than, potentially hook myself in a very painful location. I've hooked myself in the ear, I've hooked myself in the hand, and although that's like the most normal place to hook yourself when you're messing with hooks, especially when you're unhooking a fish, especially with a larger fish with a larger hook, or if going back to the idea of lure fishing, if you're using a treble hook, you get a hook with a barb, which I pinch down most of my barbs, but if you get a treble hook with a barb in your hand while it's still attached to the fish, that's almost the worst thing that I can imagine, because then it's not like, okay, I've got an injury in my arm, or I have an injury even in my neck, like through the skin of my neck. To have it in your hands, that's going to ruin the rest of your fishing day. So I would say I'd rather be skunked on that particular day than walk away from that day with a hook injury that I'm not allowed to pick where it happens. But excellent and scary question, Daniel. All right, Timothy, maybe this is the last one. Go for it.
What is your favorite fly to use?
Ooh. Okay, favorite fly to use. Which is interesting because, as I'll talk about here at the end of the podcast, this week on the website, I put in my top 3 flies and then 3 more flies. So that is something that people could read kind of more, and I don't think I'm contradicting myself when I say that my favorite fly, and this is not going to shock anybody, it is a woolly bugger. Right? Everybody likes the woolly bugger, and here's the reason why. And I say it's my favorite fly for a few reasons. Now, it's a versatile fly. Now, I love fishing dry flies, and I often fish dry flies, but you can't have the same versatility with a dry fly that you can with something like a woolly bugger. So I love a woolly bugger because I can fish it like a nymph, but I can also fish it like a streamer. And in a lot of the places that I learned to fish, it was the way that I learned how to fish. So it's my favorite fly. But let me be very specific. And I know that I'm not reinventing the wheel or creating any sort of new ground in the fly tying world by saying this, but my absolute favorite woolly bugger is a sparsely hackled, I guess you could say, woolly bugger with a thicker winding of hackle up by the head of the fly, tied on a jig hook with a thick red collar. So I'm not sure if I've written an article about that, because it's one of those things where I don't necessarily want to say, oh, here's the best woolly bugger, because there's a billion best woolly buggers out there. But I like that fly because to me it has that hot spot. Having a jig hook, you're able to fish it in some places where you might otherwise get hung up. I think you can also have a little bit of a greater silhouette of that fly by having a more thickly hackled collar. So that's my preference. If I had to have one fly, I would not be feeling like I was making a compromise, like leaving behind my yellow humpy, which is also one of my favorite flies, which I guess I can't say to have the particular kind of woolly bugger that I tied. So how about you? What's your favorite fly to fish, Timothy?
I like a woolly bugger.
Yeah, do you have a color that you like the best?
Olive.
All of them or olive?
Olive.
All of them or olive?
Olive.
Oh, that makes more sense. Okay. How about you, Daniel?
Squammy Wummy.
I'm almost positive that in a previous podcast that you've said squirmy wormy is your favorite fly with that exact same inflection. You've caught trout on squirmy wormies. You've caught bass on squirmy wormies. You've caught lots and lots of bluegill on squirmy wormies. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
A question on top of the question that I asked Dad. What is your favorite dry fly?
Oh, it's the yellow humpy by a long shot. I absolutely love it. So if you look at my one of the logos I've been using on social media and on Casting Across, it is a kind of a stylized gray and orange humpy. And I do like an orange humpy, but I like a yellow humpy because it's a little bit more natural, and it's a softer silhouette, I think. And again, I'm all about silhouettes of flies when they're on the surface, and you can really change a fly's silhouette by the color that you use. So even if you use a bulkier body but you use a lighter thread color or dubbing color, I think it creates a gentler silhouette. So you have a bigger, chunkier fly, easier for you to see, creates more displacement on the water. Those hack will go out further, but at the same time, when that fish is looking up, especially if the water's moving at all, it's not going to be this giant, big, clunky fly. Plus, I think the humpy and the Royal Coachman and like a couple other flies were the first flies that I started using when I was fishing mountain brook trout. So it holds a special place in my heart, and I always have a couple in my box and like clipped to my pack. Very good question. All right. Anything else, boys? We're at 20 minutes. That's when I start wrapping things up. Any other important things to add? Daniel?
No.
Timothy?
No, not really.
Well, gentlemen, once again, thank you for being on the podcast. I know that I enjoy having you on here. I know that other people write in and grab me when I'm out in public at fly fishing events and say how much they enjoy listening to you. If you, as a listener, have any questions for Timothy and Daniel, I'm not going to promise that they're going to be on the podcast next week, but if you send something in, then I'll make sure that they pass along. So Matthew@castingacross.com is how you can get a hold of me. And again, next week is another Fly Fishing Accusations podcast. So feel free to send in any questions about fly fishing, about gear, about where I fish, and I'm happy to answer a handful of those on the air. This week on the Casting Across website, castingacross.com, first article is called Fly Fish Out of a Backpack. Fly Fish Out of a Backpack. And this is basically my article talking about how I've been fishing more and more out of a big backpack. My sling pack is always in use, but when I'm going into the woods or when I'm carrying something bigger, I use a backpack. And there's a number of reasons for it, and I outlined 3 of them, and I also address the biggest drawback that people assume they're going to have when they're using a backpack as their primary method of storage when they go fly fishing. Wednesday's article is called Rusty Fly Box, Fewer Flies. And as I alluded to earlier in the podcast, there's one article that's called Why Only 3 Flies? So if I were to only have 3 flies in my box. And then the next article is 3 more flies. So this is like my 3 primary flies and then my 3 secondary flies. And then I have a podcast episode that you might have already heard if you're a regular listener, but if not, this is a good one to go and listen to. And it talks about kind of the theory and the method about having a minimalist fly box. And the key to it, whether you're fishing for trout in the mountains, or on spring creeks, or on big rivers, or you're fishing for bass, or you're fishing in the saltwater, the key is you want flies that can do all the things that you need, but you want flies that are going to be versatile enough for you to focus on your presentation and how you're fishing and not necessarily on what you're fishing. I'm a firm believer, and there's a lot better anglers than me that believe this, that a lot of your success is not dependent upon pattern, it's dependent upon presentation. And so that's really what I'm trying to do for myself and hopefully can encourage you to do as well. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a pair of scissors from Loon Outdoors. I prefer Loon tying tools for my fly tying bench. I think they're comfortable in my hand and they also execute very well. And this particular pair of scissors is the Ergo Arrow Point scissors. The Ergo Arrow Point scissors. They've been around for about 2 or 3 years, and they have a really nice design. Again, they fit great in my hand, and right about where the blades come together is right over my index finger's knuckle as I'm squeezing them. So they allow for a lot of precision. I have probably medium-sized hands, so they would fit larger hands but also smaller hands. and they are just a very narrow blade, and they're very sharp. They are a really tight tolerance, and I use them for probably more stuff than I should. Probably not as delicate with them as I should be, cutting thicker, heavier materials than they're probably designed for. But that being said, they've held up very, very well. Scissors that sharp usually kind of have a self-sharpening element to them. But I'm a really big fan, and like I said, I probably use these more than I should. They come in a yellow handle and a black handle. They hold up really well, incredibly sharp tip, and what I like about them is that you can cut with the tip, or you can cut using kind of the all the way up into the deeper part of the scissor. But for $16, they're definitely worth giving a try if you're trying to find that perfect pair of scissors. I like a chunkier pair of scissors, at least a chunkier handle, and so that's what I like about kind of the rubber coated or powder coated scissors from Loon. So I'll put a link to the Ergo Arrow Point scissors on the show notes of this podcast's page on castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
In Wild Country, rules were not created by man. Don't miss Wild Country, Wednesdays from 7 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Presented by Primos. Speak the language. Waypoint TV, the destination for outdoor entertainment. A life that has the stories to back it. A life to be proud of. It's a Winchester life.
Yeah, baby. 6'8" Western. Oh, mule deer, baby, right there.
Tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.